Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the gentleman yield to a question?
He will yield.
Gentlemen, do you know how many homeless trans youth we have in Kentucky?
I do not.
Gentleman from Lincoln.
May I ask another question?
He will yield to a question.
Sorry, still new bill to me. Section 1, page 2, row 25, looks like D, subsection D. Nothing in this subsection shall prohibit a school district or district personnel from withholding information from a parent if a reasonably prudent person would believe, based on previous conduct and history, that the disclosure would result in the child becoming a dependent child or an abused or neglected child as defined in KRS 600.020. The fact that the district personnel withhold information from a parent under the subsection shall not in itself constitute evidence of failure to report dependency, neglect, or abuse from the Cabinet of Health and Family Services under KRS 20.030. My question is, who dictates what is abuse and neglect and where they may have a problem?
Gentleman from Lincoln.
I think abuse and neglect is very clearly defined in the statutes, as it is used in child welfare many times every single day. Teachers, administrators, doctors, healthcare providers, they all use their discretion on abuse and neglect. That does not change.
Will he yield to another question?
He will yield.
Can you name some of those tools that they use to identify the abuse and neglect?
Gentleman from Lincoln.
As I have seen many times in the school systems, I will start with that. If a child comes in with bruises that should not be in a particular area, if a child comes to them and mentions things about abuse, there are ways for them. They've been trained many times in ways to speak to that child to find out if that is accurate of what they're telling them. They make that decision after those types of analysis.
Lady from Jefferson.
Will he yield to another question?
He will yield.
The bill goes on page 3 to mention that prior to a well-being questionnaire or assessment or a health screening form being given to a child for research purposes, a school shall provide the student's parent with access to review the material and shall obtain parental consent. Parental consent shall not be a general consent to these assessment forms, but shall be required for each assessment or form. A parent's refusal to consent shall not be an indicator of having a belief regarding the topic of the assessment or form. So my question is, it seems to me that those types of assessments, that while they may be used for research purposes, could potentially spark a child to be prompted to believe that maybe they have been abused or neglected. So my question is, how, with the permission to opt in or out and to not be using this as a flag to maybe determine abuse or neglect, are we taking away one of our tools to identify this abuse and neglect, given that students may then be able to more identify what may have been right or wrong within their life?
Gentleman from Lincoln.
No, the health screening forms are basic information that is given about the child and their health. When making a determination on abuse and neglect, it is typically physical, and it is an interaction between the student, the teacher, the administrator, or whoever.
Lady from Jefferson, 38.
May I speak on the bill?
Yes, ma'am.
My colleagues have brought up several concerns around the protections of LGBTQ youth and their fellow young people. I mean, this bill obviously came to me today in the current form that it's in, so forgive me for taking the time to pause and really think about what every aspect of this bill, being so broad, may involve. So I think I'll start with homeless trans youth. I mentioned previously when I spoke on House Bill 470 that 1 in 4, that's 25% of our Black, transgender, and non-binary young people have reported a suicide attempt in the past year. I will go to say that in talking with youth, they often feel unwanted in their homes and like they have no place to turn to, or that they were actively kicked out by their families who should love them despite anything. But instead, they turn to the streets. They turn to folks who will support them. And in our affordable housing crisis, we often have a lot of young people who end up homeless. And I've experienced that in my home district of Jefferson 38. So I have great concern at not only how discussion of this bill sends a message to those young people, I have concerns of what those numbers will look like in the future in terms of our homeless population, but also in our suicide numbers. Page 3 of the bill then goes into things that may or may not have anything to do with the LGBTQ community, but I take issue with. I'm seeing abstinence from sexual activity is the desirable goal for all school-age children. Abstinence from sexual activity is the only certain way to avoid unintended pregnancy, sexually transmitted diseases, and other health problems. So with that, I have some rhetorical questions. You know when somebody tells you not to go out and do something, doesn't that kind of make you want to go and do it? I also think that in my upbringing, which was not too long ago, as you all know, sexually, medically accurate sex education was what my fellow young people were talking about. We wanted to know about our bodies. We wanted to know and make informed decisions around how to treat the body and how to respect others. Now, when I'm given abstinence-only information, I lack those informed decisions. And I don't want to speak for anybody else's body, so I'll just speak for myself. Learning about one's body is fundamental to keeping yourself safe. How am I able to say no when someone tries to harm me if I do not know what is appropriate, wanted, or could do me harm? I will say I ran into that problem, not only as a young person, but in this body. I have made reports about sexual misconduct, not from my fellow legislators, but people who come to visit. But one begs the question, oh, is this just what somebody has deemed as appropriate? It's up to me to say, no, it was not appropriate. It made me uncomfortable. And to report and say something. However, all too many times, we stand idly by and just say, oh, they didn't know any better. It's about age. No. It's all of our responsibility to have the tools to say when a child is being harmed, or an adult, because children become adults. I sigh a lot today. I sigh because I don't know what else to do. So I'm going to go on. Can I yield to another question?
Gentleman from Lincoln, will you yield to another question?
I will yield.
Thank you, sir. Do you know at what age a young person could begin menstruation?
Gentleman from Lincoln.
I would say that varies on the person.
Lady from Jefferson.
Thank you. Continue to speak on the bill.
Yes, ma'am.
I would say that is true. And again, I said I would only speak for my own self today. And I know that changes to my body in terms of puberty began around the 3rd grade. I was lucky to have sisters, older sisters, who could tell me and inform me of what to expect. I know that the term menstruation may make some people on the House floor uncomfortable, but it is natural. If we're talking about human biology, it is a natural process, just as is breastfeeding, and we should not be ashamed to talk about these topics. I fear that the age of when we're teaching our young people, apparently abstinence only, and giving them not medically accurate sex education could do harm, not just to whether or not our young people know whether or not they're being abused, whether or not they feel comfortable sharing if they were being abused, but also whether or not they're comfortable around their peers. When Roe v. Wade was overturned and our state's trigger law went into effect, I had a fear that what would come next was attacks on birth control. And I don't want to fearmonger, but I do feel that the language in this bill, we don't talk about birth control. We just say abstinence. And you find yourself pregnant? Well, right now in the state, you don't have access to insurance until you deliver your baby. So good luck staying healthy. I fear that what the policies our state has chosen to adopt limits itself to more harm, more pregnancy. And with that, as a young lady who her mama always taught her to make sure that she was becoming financially independent, and I did that. Why did I do that? Because I had enough
Jefferson
privilege.
38, I'd ask that you limit your comments to those relevant to the matter at hand, which is the House Committee sub.
Okay. I will return to make the connection. So, the connection about financial independence is that when we are only taught abstinence only sexual education in our schools, and we don't know what other methods are out there, and we start to explore things for ourselves because we haven't been given that education as to what other options exist, financial independence also lacks. That is my point. So the bill goes on page 5 to talk about different materials that may be reviewed if found in violation. Another rhetorical question would be, how are teachers supposed to operate in these environments? Teachers often come to me and tell me, we want to be able to teach in our schools. We want to make sure that we're able to spend time with our students and to provide the curriculum that we need. Also, they don't want to be held up every chance possible by maybe one vocal parent to continue to review what is going on in the classroom. This is why we as a society decide curriculum and then put it in our school systems. So, I will return to the fact that when I last spoke on House Bill 470, I reminded our young people and all the folks at home watching that as we discuss these topics today, if you find yourself in need of the Suicide and Crisis Hotline, to please call 988 or contact the Trevor Project. And I find this bill and the committee sub to be extremely hypocritical to what folks have said the goal is of the legislation, which it has been said to be protection of children and parental rights. And I continue to stand up for the folks of District 38 who believe that it's actually hypocrisy, and that if you have a trans young person in your life that you are a parent or guardian of, you're losing your say. You're losing your child's right to be included in school. And the provisions to help fellow young people and our future adults to learn what they'll need to be equipped in society, we lose that with this bill. I have I've said it before, I'm not LGBTQ, but I have friends and family who are. Some have left the state altogether because they haven't felt included because of legislation like what's before us. And it took them a long time before they felt comfortable to share their true self with their family and friends. I ask you why that might be. I have friends who have been assaulted and to this day have not sought the care that they need in this state. And that is because they face fear, not only from the sexual assault that they experienced, but from the lack of care that they can get in this state, and also because that they might be criticized or not welcomed. They're scared, and instead of welcoming them, we propose more legislation like this. I am appalled, and I will continue to stand with the people of District 38 who elected me to be here and have been a vocal champion against this bill, and I will continue to fight for them. Thank you.
State your point.
Under Section 51 of the Kentucky Constitution, I seek a ruling from the chair regarding the germaneness of Senate Bill 150 to the House committee substitute. The bill, an act relating to children, applies to students who may be older than 18 and contains an emergency clause not reflected in the title.
Gentleman from Franklin, while your point of order is not particularly in order at this point, since the title is not before the body, it will eventually be. So I will go ahead and answer that and not answer it again. As really in the chair, the title amendment is in order. Section 55 of the Constitution requires emergency be declared by the majority of members elected by a yea and nay vote entered upon their journals. The reasons for the emergency to be set out in length of the journal. Contents of the bill satisfy these requirements, including declaring an emergency in the title is merely a drafting convention to alert the chamber to the higher vote threshold. So that, therefore, the ruling of the chair is that it is germane. Chair recognizes the lady from Jefferson 32.
May I speak on the bill?
Yes, ma'am.
I wasn't sure if I was going to have words for today, right now, this afternoon, and I've reflected and almost decided not to stand up. But what I believe is that this is a bill to try to erase a group of people. Not yet a final solution, but erasure. As if you can tell a child with gender dysphoria that we're not going to treat you with medically approved practices because here in Kentucky, it's illegal. When I wrote my dissertation, I sat alongside a colleague for several years. My dissertation was on students with autism going to college. His dissertation was on students who identify as trans and how school counselors can support them. You learn a lot in a couple of years from someone else's research. And one thing I learned is how powerful the use of puberty blockers could be for a young child with gender dysphoria. What my friend told me is that that gives a child time to mature. We're not talking surgery on children. We're talking block the development of puberty. And then when they're old enough that you've come to a conclusion with professional support that they do or do not want to go through puberty as the gender that they were assigned at birth, you can make that decision. Because of the support of the American Medical Association and the American Academy of Pediatrics, I'm pretty assured that this is a safe and reasonable process. We're not going to be able to do it here. The other day, I went to a middle school, and there were two students there who identify as trans. one of whom had a patch that I can only assume was puberty blockers. My daughter has a best friend who transitioned in college. By then, she had developed all the masculine traits. She was an adult. This legislation wouldn't impact her. But if she would have been able to have the treatment that she may have wanted to have when she was younger, she would be able to have a more fulfilling life. But that's not really the point here. And that's not the point that's happened in other states, where this type of a ban turns into a ban of gender-affirming care for adults. And we continue to decide that a specific group of people should not exist as who they are. I hoped when I heard that our colleague, former Representative Jerry Miller, came and testified in committee about his grandchild, that might influence a few of you. A couple of years ago, Rep. Miller would have certainly voted exactly how most of you are. But now he knows differently. He has a loved one who has gender dysphoria. And if there's nothing that a parent does, it is that they love their children. And grandparents, oh my gosh, they love their grandchildren. I'm shaking inside because of the pain and suffering it will cause to the children of this Commonwealth. Very few, less than 1% of our population. You cannot erase a group of people. These children will be transgender. They may not get puberty blockers to allow them to have a more fulfilling adulthood, but they will be transgender. And if or when one of your family members shares that he or she is transgender, what will you do? And how will you feel then?
State your point.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this, but there's a lot of confusion with people watching. Can you rule on and explain why this is or is not a piggyback?
Under House rules, lady from Fayette, a piggyback is, first of all, not applicable to a bill that has passed the House. Secondly, a piggyback is not a piggyback if it's in a committee sub. Chair recognizes the lady from Jefferson 40.